Super BS
presents Frank here. Today I had the pleasure of chatting with Andy Schatz, the lead designer on Tooth and Tail and the creator of the indie game studio Pocketwatch Games. Today we chatted about his place in the rise of indie video games in the early 2000s, about the console real-time strategy game and what it means to play a strategy game with a controller, and much more. Enjoy. Thank you for joining us. If you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself.
I'm Andy Schatz, and I am the owner, creative director, and designer and lead programmer at Pocketwatch Games, creators of Tooth and Tail and Monaco, What's Yours Is Mine.
Yeah, man. I actually did a little bit of digging. It sounds like you've been in the industry for a little bit of time, even before that. Do you mind, do you want to talk about those first games, the Tycoon games?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'm just curious about that. That sounds really awesome.
Yeah. I started Pocketwatch Games in 2005. So we've been around a long time in, what is now known as the indie game space, or indie game development industry. And yeah, my first game as an indie was a game called Wildlife Tycoon Venture Africa.
Yeah, was that like a big, like a major publisher that asked you to do the game, or I don't know much about it?
No. I mean, this was, we were indie from the start. The idea was, so I was working in the big budget industry. I was working as a contractor for EA at a company called TKO Software before that. And got completely burnt out, pulling all-nighters on a terrible game, and eventually was just like, I want nothing to do with this. So I applied to a bunch of business schools with the intention that I would go to business school. I'd quit my job, go to business school, and come back and fix the industry as an idealistic 23, 4-year-old was... 24, 25-year-old was imagining that one can fix an entire industry. So I applied to these schools. I quit my job, and I figured I've got 9 months before classes will start. I'll just make a game. And maybe I can even sell it because the casual game market was starting to become a thing.
Okay, yeah.
It was the very beginnings of the digital distribution, before XBLA, before any of this stuff.
iOS was like a year or two later. Yeah.
Actually, Steam had just launched. The Steam launched in 2004. I quit my job, and 4 months later, I got rejected from all 4 schools. But in the same week, I'd gotten a bunch of press coverage for the game that I was making. So I was like, I guess I'll just make the game and I'll start my company now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. You know?
And what's cool about it is, I've gotten to really be in the thick of the rise of indie games as a movement. And, I hosted the Independent Games Festival Awards 5 times. We won it for Monaco. We won the grand prize and a design award. That original game, Venture Africa, was nominated for a grand prize. And while I certainly don't get to take credit for everything in the indie games space, and I've really just been a very small part of it, being a small part of it, having the dreams of fixing the game industry, in many ways we did.
Yeah, I mean, the huge I don't want to say rush, but onslaught almost of great indie titles kind of came out. I remember Monaco being right around that time, 2013. I want to say 2011 to 2013. That was The Braid. That was Castle Crashers, all the small companies.
Braid was Braid won the design award in the IGF, in the Independent Games Festival year that Venture Africa was nominated. It was the same. It was actually the same year. It was before Braid was out. Many years before Braid was out.
Yeah, because Braid didn't release till 2009 or 10, right?
It was before 10.
Way later.
It was before 10. I would have been either I think it was probably 2008 when it came out.
Okay.
I think.
But yeah, it's I mean, it really did help change. And you were, I mean, it seems like part of it, man. You were making games when I felt like only big publishers made games.
Yeah,
in 2005.
yeah. Well, we were sort of latching on to the casual game thing. So there were a bunch of like the very early indie game scene was latching onto that and distributing games through like Yahoo Games and Big Fish Games and things like that. And then XBLA came along and Steam and Valve opened up Steam a little more, and that's when things really blew up.
Well, I want to talk a lot about Tooth and Tail today, but before we get into that, your last game before it, Monaco, kind of set, I would say, the indie scene on fire for a while. I remember reading it winning tons of awards and stuff. And I was wondering how that affected the process of creating Tooth and Tail. Like, I didn't get too much of a chance to play much of Monaco, but I'm wondering if there's any similarities in that, like game design, or if it all affected the process of making Tooth.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned a lot about game design in particular on Monaco, and really developed an aesthetic from a design perspective. And I don't mean aesthetic strictly visually. In fact, Tooth and Tail looks virtually nothing like Monaco from a visual perspective, but from a design perspective, they're really very, very similar. Even though they're completely different genres. And so that really, really informed how we built Tooth and Tail. Design iteration was something that we spent a lot of time with on Tooth and Tail, for better or for worse. That's why it took as long as it did. 3.5 years or so in development.
I remember being in the beta for it.
Yeah.
And talking to the community about 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And we really worked hard on trying to get the core controls and the core design to be as close to perfect as we could get them for to make the game easy to pick up and play and simple to play without losing any of the mechanical depth of real-time strategy.
So if you wouldn't mind giving the listeners just a quick rundown about Tooth and Tail, just in case they haven't seen any of the videos, which they should have, right, or heard about it multiple times, which they should have on the podcast.
Sure, yeah. So Tooth and Tail is a real-time strategy game about animals at war over who gets to eat and who must be eaten. And the hook, as far as mechanics go, is anyone can play this real-time strategy game. If you've ever been frustrated at real-time strategy, or if you feel like you're not good at it, so you don't play it, if you're intimidated by it, or if you really love the genre but you would prefer to play something that is really focused on fast and fun. And I don't mean casual, because it's still mechanically very deep, but it is very, very fast and very fun and focused on improvisation and creativity rather than practicing a build order or having perfect micro. So to that end, we do a lot of things like you can play the game in split screen. You can, the matches are just 5 to 12 minutes long. The maps are all randomly generated. There's a big, long story campaign with lots of interesting characters and missions and all sorts of stuff like that. There's a million different ways to play the game, and it's just, we like to say it's the Hearthstone of real-time strategy.
Yeah, as a big console fan, and pretty much, I rarely play PC games. I played the Tooth and Tail beta on PC, and that was about it. But I love the idea of controller-based strategy games. I was one of the few people who loved StarCraft 64, so that should give you an idea of who I was. How much of Tooth and Tail was made from your guys' love of Goblin Commander Unleash the Horde? You know what?
Yeah, actually, going back to your previous question real quick, I probably should clarify. You can play the game. In fact, it's great on a controller. We really designed it to be able to be played on the controller.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. Oh, sorry. I knew that, so I just kind of used my knowledge. I forgot to say. Yeah, but it definitely was like a controller thing, and it reminded me, not at all playing its way more fluid and fun and the aesthetics better, but it reminds me of playing Goblin Commander Unleashed. Do you know what that is?
I many people have mentioned it to me, but I've never played it.
It is, yeah. You are literally like a goblin, and you create like, minions who follow you around, and you can only have X amount of them.
Gotcha.
But it's a very, obviously it's nothing like Tooth and Tail in a lot of ways.
Right.
But so when did you guys start working on Tooth and Tail?
I started prototyping in January of 2014. But we didn't start in earnest until April of 2014.
All right, so about 3+ years,
Three
a
and a
little bit
half
over
years.
3 years.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the normal development cycle. How much did the game change along the way?
Well, I would say, the initial iterations of it were very fast. Within the first year, we had, we were very sort of close to what the game was. But then we spent a lot of time trying to find the right artists and really, really iterate on the core design. And a lot of that stuff, it was necessary to making the game good, but they're all very subtle changes. And then over the last year of development, that's when we were working on things like the PlayStation 4 and split screen, the campaign, things like that. So that was a year of very, very hard work. I'd say that the game obviously changed tremendously over the first year and over the last year, but that middle section, we were spending a lot of time really just iterating on the core design.
That's excellent. And so I read you guys use the Monogame game engine.
Yeah.
What is that?
Monogame is Microsoft made a gaming framework called XNA for this was for the Xbox Live Indie Games portal on the Xbox 360.
On the 360.
Yeah. And it was a fantastic framework. So it's not a full engine like Unity or Unreal. It's really just a sort of low-level framework, somewhat bare-bones framework for you to be able to build on top of. This XNA framework, and by that I mean it's like it is code, right? It's
yeah.
And
is it in C++ or
it's
Java?
In C#.
Or?
It's in C#.
Oh, C#.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And this was a somewhat beloved framework. There's a lot of famous games that were built on XNA, including Fez, I believe Terraria, Monaco, a ton of other big games. The Microsoft eventually shut down Xbox Live Indie Games, and they shut down XNA, and they stopped supporting it. But in the meantime, there was a new project called Monogame that was intended to basically be, it's a cross-platform replacement for XNA. So the idea was, XNA was only available on PC or on the Xbox. You could only put it on those things, but Monogame was an open source project that was intended to be a one-to-one replacement for XNA, but working cross-platform for Mac, Linux, PC, and the console platforms as well, and mobile platforms too. We worked with Sickhead, actually the primary group behind that open source project, for the PlayStation 4 port as well.
Oh, that's excellent, man. I know very little about that. It sounds like open source, like not full engine, but that framework. So the game reminds me of like a revolutionary Redwall, and the aesthetic is just so. That's what drew me to it. Is literally the first image I saw. Who does your art? The art looks like familiar, but I can't place what other games that person's worked on.
The guy who did the painted art. We have two artists that worked on the project, Jerome Jacinto and Adam DeGrandis. Jerome Jacinto did all the painted art. We actually found him by Googling Redwall fan art.
Nice. That's awesome.
He lives in the Philippines. He is a high-level parkour professional. He does a lot of parkour. And he has worked on a couple other games, but most notably, he did some art on Armello, although probably not. Oh. Yeah, I don't want to get Jerome is great, but he's not their primary artist.
Okay.
He did some of the cards in Armilla. So, but his style is fantastic. If you look him up on his DeviantArt, you'll see a lot of Redwall fan art, and he's just amazing. And then Adam DeGrandis is the other artist. We worked with him. I've worked with him on every project that Pocketwatch Games has ever worked on.
Oh, excellent.
And he's just he teaches art at the Maine College of Art and Design, and he's a great generalist. These days, he's also working with Spry Fox, who does a ton of really cool indie projects.
Oh, that's excellent, man. So how big was the team to make this game?
About 7 primary contributors.
Oh, wow.
And then there's a whole bunch of other people that contributed in some manner or another.
Well, one of the people that I've recognized, and I'm sure you get talked to about this person a lot, is Austin Wintory.
Yes.
Like, how was it working with him? His music's amazing. I've bought the soundtrack. It's excellent.
Austin is amazing. Austin is incredibly creative. He is insatiably creative. Sometimes, and he's also one of the most puppy dog enthusiastic people I know. It's really fun to work with him because he's the kind of guy that, from a management perspective, I'm basically just holding a leash, and he's the puppy on the walk, and he wants to sniff and smell everything. He wants to go everywhere, and he wants to do crazy stuff. And so shaping and guiding that enthusiasm is a joy, because it's there's never a sense of like I always know that he's going to surprise. He's going to surprise. He's going to do interesting stuff, and I know that he loves working with me in particular because I let him do the crazy stuff that he wants to do.
Yeah, man.
So
you can hear that, and just even the opening title track, it's just really, really cool and creative. And I was really caught off guard because, I mean, normally the only time I find out about a game's soundtrack is while I'm playing it, but this one I actually kind of paid attention to it more when I listen to the tracks separately and watch the video. I mean, they're great in the game, right, but like I was like, whoa, okay, there's a lot to this. What are your guys' short-term, and if you have them, long-term plans for Tooth and Tail?
Yeah, so short-term, well, we're going to TwitchCon this weekend, so we'll be there and hopefully meet a bunch of streamers.
Awesome.
And then after that, we've got a few things coming down the pipe, and we do have a public roadmap. So if anyone wants to go check out that public roadmap, it's on Trello. You can search for Tooth and Tail public roadmap, and it should pop up. After that, we have some things like being able to customize your commander's flag. I'd like to get a beta version of the level editor out there for people to be able to fool with. It may never be anything other than a beta version because it's a little messy. And then I would eventually like to start adding new units to the game. And I'd like to add in player stats so that people can track their own stats.
That'd be cool.
We're going to roll over the seasons, so there'll be a season 2 on the leaderboards in the ranked ladder. And we've got PS4 crossplay coming, hopefully soonish. And let's see, I think there was one other thing I was thinking about. What was it? I've got a fun little project for the single-player campaign that I'm going to engage the community with, and that is all of the maps are procedurally generated, even though the missions themselves are authored. But what I'd like to do is come up with a standard seed for each of the missions, so that you can play the standard campaign where the missions or the terrain is locked into a single configuration, and then you can play the hard mode, which is where the missions randomly generate the terrain.
Oh, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and then I'm going to what I want to do is crowdsource what the standard seeds are on those procedurally generated levels.
So I got to ask 2 hard questions for you.
Yeah, go for it.
One is, we are huge fans of the Microsoft platform here, just because, Like PlayStation definitely, surprised a lot of people this generation and did a lot of great things. But I do love the ability to play my old games backwards compatible, and I've always enjoyed the Microsoft controller. Are you guys planning on bringing the game to Xbox One?
That would be awesome. We don't currently have any plans to, but we'll see. We'll see.
And then the other thing that I play, I have all three, but the one that I've been playing the most recently is my Switch. I don't know if you own one of those.
I do. I am obsessed with Breath of the Wild. It's probably my favorite game of the past 5-10 years.
It's amazing. Are you guys thinking about bringing it to that? Because that's something I love playing games on too.
I'd really love to. We'd love to bring the game to the Switch.
Yeah, I don't want to take too much of your time, but aside from Tooth and Tail, are there any other projects you guys are working on, or are those too far off to even talk about?
Probably too far off to because I'm starting to have some ideas percolating in my head, but not. But there's no work being done on that yet. We really want to just focus on Tooth and Tail and continuing to support the community and grow the community as well.
Well, I think you guys are doing an excellent job. The game's just beautiful, and it's a ton of fun to play. Appreciate you for taking your time, Andy. If there's one last thing is there anything that you could leave, like, aspiring developers who are looking into getting into the game industry, like some piece of advice or that you could give to them?
Sure, yeah. I think that the piece of advice that I usually give to aspiring developers is don't get too ambitious. Never get too ambitious. No matter what you are trying to build, it will take 3 times longer and be 3 times harder than you expected it to be. And a finished game is a far more satisfying experience than a finished small game is a far more satisfying experience than an unfinished large game. So start with something very, very small. Even when you get to be really good at making games, build small things because they will always be bigger and harder than you expect them to be.
Very, very true. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for your time. I really appreciate it. If you guys are going to TwitchCon this week, check them out and talk with them. Anything else that you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, I suppose if your listeners want to join us in our Discord channel, that's where our community hangs out. That's discord.gg/pocketwatch, or you can follow us on Twitter at pocketwatchg. And we'll see you on the battlefield.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Bye. Thanks for listening. And if you can, please rate us on iTunes. Check out Tooth and Tail on PlayStation 4 or Steam. Follow Pocket Watch Games on Twitter. Jump on their Discord. And keep in touch. Email us at superbscast@gmail.com. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
That's to us people that can feel things. It hurts.